The tree had yet to bear its fruit for an Aravos that would wear the crown. This was its third attempt. The first Aravos it blossomed in bounty for strayed and faltered, though not entirely of their own making. The second died in land far away, then laid amidst stone beneath the halls of their home, laid to rest away from the tree they loved and that loved them, laid to rest away from the tree that had doomed their fate, or so the tree believes. The second had only been 17, and so the tree refused to share its fruit with another. For 144 years did a single apple not grow and fall from its bough, not until the year of 324 before fall, when 5 of the Unifier's blood were born. And for the 13 years that have passed since that year, the apples have continued to fall throughout the seasons, year after year. Even when a tree should not bear its fruit, still this one continues. None know why, aside from that tree, and perhaps the land beneath where the tree buries its roots. Yet the one the tree blossoms for is not a descendant of its first attempt, nor a descendant of the second. But the third does share the second's name, and not just a name do they share, for also a physicality do they appear near identical to the tree. The second had eyes a deep blue that boasted the twinkling stars of the night sky, but could also appear a dark green if the second wore clothing of different color than that of their royal family. For the third, one day they could appear blue like a cloudless sky. On another, it was like staring at the grass that stretched out from around the tree and the pond beside it. The young Aravos preferred it when their eyes were green, as the blue brought them expectations that they did not desire, that they felt they could never meet. Expectations the tree perhaps helped create, expectations that the tree did not intend, like the death of the second at so young an age. The tree feared that its fruit had become a curse. All it had taken was the death of one to spark fear into its roots. The young Aravos feared that the name they bore was a curse, and so too did the world around them. For this Aravos was the third of the royal line to bear the name, the previous 2 all having died young. The third Aravos to be chosen by the tree, and the third Aravos to bear the name. Hey there, guys. Alright, today we are back with some more overly sarcastic productions. I hope you actually watched that video. I don't know how long it's going to be as of recording this, because I haven't recorded it yet by the time I am recording this. So, yeah. I hope you guys actually watched that, and I hope you click the link in the description box below or in the comment section and go check out the Kickstarter. At the very least, what matters more to me is not getting the money. The most important part of this is to have you guys read the chapters that I have put up for free and give me your feedback. If you enjoy it, share it. If you don't enjoy it, but you may know someone that you think it might fit, share it. That's essentially just word of mouth. Spread my writing. That's really the more important thing there, instead of actually getting the funding. Now, of course, saying that is perhaps bad marketing kind of thing, because it's like, I do kind of need it to get funded, so I can I can live. Yeah. Just hope you enjoy those free excerpts. I wasn't sure which ones to share. Originally I was only going to share like a couple chapters, but then I was like, you know what? I want to introduce y'all to kind of the 2 main POVs. And then I was like, well, I also really like chapter 5. I want to share that. And I didn't want to just like give like a bunch of scrambling mishmash kind of chapters. I was like, you know what? I'll just give 1 through 5. There we go. So yeah. Anyways, Faustian bargains. Is that like where you like make a deal with the devil kind of thing? I really don't. I should have looked it up before watching this, but I didn't. I always forget to do that. So let's just dive in and have Red explain it in her usual amazing way.
In the world of fiction, there are many ways to acquire power. Some characters are born with it, gifted with some privilege or ability that sets them apart from their peers, and while it might take them some time to fully come into their own, the power they wield is within them all along. Then there are the characters who achieve or earn their power, proving their worth through trials and challenges and training, typically starting from nothing before working their way to a level of strength or ability or capital unmatched by most around them. And then there are characters who gain their power unwillingly, by way of an accident or unexpected inheritance or legacy or the bequeathment of an empowering artifact or some other way a great power can unexpectedly find its way to a questionably willing host. This trifecta forms the three classical ways one can be powerful: to be born great, to achieve greatness, or to have greatness thrust upon one. You either have it from the beginning, seek it out along the way, or get smacked by a pop fly in the outfield and wake up with superpowers. But in the
Or you can do all three.
gray area between achieving greatness and being inflicted with greatness, we find a fourth option that is almost universally regarded as cheating, and that is bargaining for greatness. Characters in this paradigm gain their power by just asking for it and giving something back in return. This may sound fair on paper, perhaps even more fair than the other three options we've just described, but it basically never is, in large part because this dynamic contains, obviously, a power imbalance. Most commonly, the person asking for the power is mortal, while the entity granting that power is immortal and supernatural in some way, and the power that the person receives is temporary, while whatever they give in return is eternal. This is by its nature an inadequate exchange for the mortal half of the equation, because no matter how
However, I really like this, actually, especially in D&D. I mean, of course, if you've watched Campaign 1 of Critical Role, spoilers for Legend of Vox Machina, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Vax, you know, to save his sister, and then he also, I think he dies, and he's like, I don't want to leave yet, but I will go with you when it's my time, after we do what we need to do or whatever, right? He dies, and he's like, you can have my soul, just let me go back for now until we get done what needs to get done. It's so good. It's so good. I love it. I love it. Hell, I fucking I think I have a deal like this going on right now. Like two of the party members in my D&D group, me and one other person, and another person, so actually three of us, have made deals with immortal deities, or what we assume to be immortal deities. And I don't know, this goes well with the doomed hero trope, and that is where it works well. This trope, I don't think, is narratively satisfying if you are not also doing the hero doing this following the doomed hero trope, right? If your hero is the doomed hero, then this essentially is part of that, right? How much, right? Like, what is it gonna cost to not have, like, we see the doom coming, what's it going to cost our heroes to, where it's still gonna be tragic, blah, blah, blah. But how are they fighting back against this, essentially what seems to be lost cause? And this is where that kind of comes in. And I personally fucking love it. I've already said before, within the last like minute. But yeah, I don't think this would work well with someone following the typical hero's journey, you know? Like someone like Luke Skywalker, it wouldn't work for. Fucking Anakin takes a Faustian bargain, essentially, in the hopes that it'll allow him to save his wife. And of course, it backfires. Him taking the bargain, actually, of Palpatine is what essentially causes Padme's death, right? So like there are a bunch of ways to twist this around, and I love this trope, man. I love it.
how great the temporary reward, eternity is always big.
And also, humans, we are very bad at seeing the long term. We see that in our politics and economics. Capitalism is a short-term economic gains system. There's no other way about it. Capitalism encourages, the way in which capitalism inherently works here is it encourages short-term. It does not. Now, of course, if you really want to be big brain and think about it large scale, yes, there are it does kind of also encourage long term, But humans are very bad at seeing the long term, so short term gains, uh, which is also why capitalism is still the predominant system in the world, because the short term gains, humans suck at seeing the long term. Anyways, that was my fuck capitalism rant for the day.
Figure. As an additional factor, bargains for power are almost always handled by entities that are morally dubious at best. Good and nice power granting
She's using Vox Machina.
entities don't tend to demand an exchange for their help, typically because they grant power for some sort of greater purpose. The power dealers that demand a bargain are usually in it for whatever they're bargaining for, with the implication that they're at best self-interested and at worst actively manipulative. The archetypical example of this sort of deal with the devil is
I am curious as to why because I don't think it's ever explained to us really why. Is it explained to us why the gods want champions? Wait, I think, like, because Vax isn't going around and, as far as I'm aware, Vax isn't going around spreading the word of the Raven Queen. She has, like, what is the purpose of champions in Matt Mercer's world? In Exandria. I haven't quite figured that out. Maybe I missed it somewhere and I haven't put it together yet. Maybe that's going to get answered with all this Red Moon shit. But if someone has theories, please fucking write it down in the in the comment section. I want to hear why you think the champions are a thing, and also just the champions of gods are a thing in general. In D&D and of itself, maybe in your own DM worlds, you're a part of groups. Fucking share your shit. Let me hear it. Give me stories.
Dr. Faust, the protagonist of a chunk of German folklore loosely based on a real historical dude who lived from the late 1400s to the mid 1500s and was a bit of a polymath by 16th century standards. So, he was way into alchemy, astrology, wizard stuff, all that good
He's
business.
just
The actual
like me
facts
for
of his
real.
life are very difficult to suss out because he's been entirely eclipsed by his folkloric counterpart, who made a deal with the devil to acquire scientific knowledge and also sick-ass wizard powers at the cost of his eternal damnation. Being a folkloric figure, the consistency of this character's story is non-existent, but that one core characteristic is pretty solidly locked in, and that is really the root of this trope in its modern form, so iconic that it's responsible for the term Faustian bargain. As discussed in the old Halloween werewolf video, the idea that real magical powers could be drawn from demonic sources was originally considered a very unchristian thing to believe, because it indicated that there was real power behind pagan false gods, etc., etc. But during the frenzy of the witch hunts, that concept fully flipped, and the idea that a human being could get wild superpowers by shaking hands with a goat man really took off. Timeline-wise, that shift lines up decently well with the original bulk of Faustian folklore, which was mostly a 1500s to 1700s thing. The broad strokes of the story described a selfish and short-sighted man who sacrificed his eternal soul for control of a fleeting power that was never really his, and only regretted it when the bill came due. And the trope hasn't drifted too far from its roots. The exchange is simple. Someone seeking power makes contact with an entity willing to give them power, at a cost. This empowering entity is usually explicitly malevolent, and in many cases is specifically demonic, satanic, or otherwise underworld adjacent. But there are exceptions. Some of these guys are just deeply inhuman with a bad case of blue and orange morality, and some of them are downright affable. They just like getting repaid for their help. The nicer ones will even bend the parameters of their deal to help out their chosen humans, but these are not the ones we'll be discussing today. The fact is, the kinds of characters willing to make Faustian bargains are almost always either bad guys or really, really desperate, and that dynamic between a power-hungry human and a powerful and evil supernatural entity is a deeply intriguing one to explore. For one thing, most villains spend their story being set up to fail. It's the nature of being the antagonist that one's role in the story is to eventually be defeated, and furthermore for that defeat to be cathartically satisfying for the audience. This means that most of a villain's arc is generally planting for the payoff of their eventual defeat, dropping weak points or hubristic boasts or Chekhov's guns for the story to fire later in a callback to their own cruelty. This is also why villains often get third act breakdowns, where whatever facade or walls they have up crack, and we get a look at the raw, unfiltered emotion boiling behind the surface. We see how the villain responds when all their plans fall apart, when their victory is ripped from them at the last minute, when the core hypocrisy of their motivation is exposed. It's the payoff for a story's worth of planting, the final cascading collapse of the domino chain of character weaknesses the story has been building around them. So villains that have made Faustian bargains are useful because they come off the shelf with a lot of that planting already done. The fact is, there's really only one way for those stories to end. The villain dies or is otherwise defeated, as is typical of villains, and the entity they made the bargain with collects on the deal, driving home that the villain was only ever working on borrowed power, and it was nothing but empty ego and delusions of grandeur that made them believe they were the master of their fate. The villain's downfall and karmic punishment for their evil is baked into
This fucking villain downfall was also fantastic. I this is a top tier Disney movie, man. Like, if y'all haven't watched Princess and the Frog, y'all gotta. I was surprised. I never watched it until like a year ago. And then I watched it. I was like, wow, that was way better than I was expecting.
To the premise of the Faustian bargain. All the good guys need to do is thwart them thoroughly enough that the satanic deal entity comes to collect and wraps the story up cleanly. Sometimes it's actually kind of a reveal that the bad guy's power came from devil dealing, and it only becomes clear to the protagonists when they get dragged off in the finale. This is also a narrative format that overlaps with the appeal of doomed hero stories, a case where you know the ending from the beginning. Characters that strike Faustian bargains for personal power are doomed by their own hand to become
Hold up, please don't have season 4 spoilers, Red.
completely subject to the whims of a massively powerful and malevolent being that
though.
controls all the power they could ever hope to wield in their own defense. And because they entered this bargain willingly, the character knows this from the beginning, though they might not have fully processed it. They understand, at least theoretically, that whatever they get from the bargain will be temporary, and the price they pay will be forever. So implicitly, they have to believe that whatever benefit they're reaping is worth the cost. Which does actually lead us to an important factor in this character archetype. What exactly did they get out of the bargain? After all, while the classic example is a power-hungry supervillain, there's a lot of things you can get out of a deal with the devil. Obviously, power is the easy one. These characters strike a deal that gives them an ability, asset, or other fun benefit designed to make their life simpler, easier, and/or more impactful on the world at large. It covers a lot of ground. Characters in this category might shoot the moon and get full wizard powers or a demonic super mode, or they might just get like a big pile of money or something they can use to fund their independently dastardly schemes. These characters are sometimes seeking power specifically for the purpose of revenge, in which case they might be very self-destructive in its pursuit, willing to sacrifice everything for the sake of vengeance. But sometimes they just want power for its own sake, maybe even for a lofty goal like trying to save the world, since power can be desired for a wide variety of reasons, which is why these guys make very good antagonists. As far as narrative threats go, superpowered bad guy juiced up on Satan aid is a pretty good way to make a seemingly insurmountable threat with a built-in defeat switch for the endgame. Faust and his various Faust-alikes are pretty much the example of this angle, striking dubious deals for power and only coming to regret it quite late in the game, when the benefits have run out and the power broker has come to collect. But this is also where you get the characters motivated by revenge, that accept a bad deal because their desire for vengeance is the only thing they care about anymore, and they'll gladly burn themselves down for the power they need to make their enemies suffer. Unlike the smug sorceress types, these guys are usually pretty tragic figures, and while they make good nightmarish villains, if they're permitted enough character development to rediscover priorities beyond revenge, they might come to regret their Faustian bargain, intensifying the tragedy of these former hotheads who sacrificed a future they—
What the fuck is this movie? I've never seen this movie, but it looks cool. Tell me the name. Give it.
never thought they'd want. There's also kind of a niche subcategory where the character gets the powers not because they wanted them, but because the thing they're dealing with demands that they take them as part of their side of the bargain. Like the Satan-alike they're dealing with really wants a vessel or a servant or a sick-ass flaming skeleton, and they just get the power set no matter—
I can't think of any off the top of my head where this one is in play.
what they asked for. This subcategory features, among other things, Ghost Rider, Kratos, Spawn, and every single magical girl in Madoka. Remember, kids, cute kitty things offering free superpowers are only benevolent like 60% of the time. Speaking of, it's common for these guys that get unwittingly roped into having superpowers to have struck a deal for someone they love. These dudes are sometimes classic Faustian villains, but are more often sympathetic at minimum, and in extreme cases are full-blown anti-heroes. They make the deal as an act of personal sacrifice to save somebody they care about, usually from death. And as a rule, because Satan-alikes are cheating bastards, those saved loved ones don't tend to stay saved for very long, because once they make the deal to save their loved one from the first falling piano, they have nothing to bargain with when the second one drops. These guys work well as sympathetic figures because they lose right out the gate. The thing they make the deal for doesn't even matter, and as an extra kick in the teeth, they're still bound to hold up their end of the bargain with their dope-ass superpowers and their tragic backstories, and yeah, I can see why these guys turn into anti-heroes. This is where you get your Ghost Riders, who get locked into a deal trying to save a loved one who immediately dies anyway. This is also why the guys making these wishes tend to get strong-armed into getting rad-as-hell power sets, because if the Satan-alike didn't do that, this deal would begin and end with, please save my loved ones, okay, psych, got your soul. It's such a quick and cruel gut punch that it functions better as an origin story than anything else. But on the flip side, you also get the characters whose only wish is to have a good time. These are the hedonistic types that wish for things like eternal youth and beauty, or for a specific person to love them, or to be super rich but with no political motivations. These guys don't tend to get the full supervillain treatment because they're obviously very short-sighted in trading eternal suffering for brief enjoyment, and thus don't make particularly good schemers. Instead, they tend to get spotlighted as villain protagonists, aka terrible people who are the main character, where often the appeal of their arc is simply watching them crash and burn. The trick is that these guys almost always star in stories about how one should be careful what they wish for, because what they think they want isn't necessarily what they need in order to be happy, because figuring out what makes you happy can be deceptively difficult. It's also frequently a monkey's paw situation, where the thing they get doesn't manifest exactly how they wanted, but they're still bound by whatever bargain gave it to them in the first place. This is where you find your Dorian Grays, the confident fancy folks who spend spent just long enough living what they think is a life of perfect hedonism to conclude that it's actually terrible and everything is pointless because the thing they thought would make them happy didn't. These stories basically start with the main character asking for something they think will fix them, getting that thing, and then gradually realizing that it didn't fix them at all. This one loops back around to the wishing for power archetype in a few places, because some people wish for power so they can use that power to be happy, and some people wish for personal happiness in the form of power over others, but in general there's a clear distinction between the turbocharged supervillains and the walking object lessons on the folly of greed. There is also some variation in the nature of the bargain. Obviously, the archetypical deal with the devil involves the mortal giving the bargaining entity their soul, but it's not always so simple or so permanent, and not every bargaining entity is the soul-taking type. Some Faustian bargains can even be reversed if the bargainer gives up what they got out of the deal, and on the flip side, sometimes the benefit of the bargain is really permanent, where instead of making a deal for temporary power, the mortal makes a deal for some sort of monstrous immortality. It might not even be explicit who they made the deal with. The power-seeking mortal just chooses to sacrifice their humanity and or their soul, and is immediately reborn as some kind of undying monster, without it ever feeling like they're beholden to anything other than the nightmare they just became. This is a common angle to take in things like Dracula origin stories that want to explain how an ordinary warlord became a vampiric eldritch abomination. These cases are a little unusual because the price of the bargain isn't directly highlighted like it is in more classical Faustian bargains, and it can seem like this.
Okay, so I can't remember, when did I last talk? I kind of just got lost in the sauce here. I don't think I've never messed with this, this kind of, this one isn't, my style. This one isn't my vibe, and I can't really think of any good examples. I mean, she's using, Dracula here, and, Dracula adaptations here. Can't think of any outside of that.
Souped up mortal actually managed to get the better end of the deal for a change, since they're legit immortal and can just keep doing their thing forever without ever answering to the thing that gave them the power in the first place. Which is why it's usually highlighted that their new life as a superpowered monstrosity is both the bargain and the price. They got what they wanted, or at least what they asked for, and the fact that they didn't seem to pay for it is actually a very bad sign. If these guys get introspective enough, they might realize that becoming a monster wasn't even what they wanted or asked for. It only became what they thought they wanted in hindsight when all their other priorities went away. The thing they struck the bargain with didn't actually hold up their end of the deal, but striking the bargain changed them so much they didn't even notice they were cheated. There's a level of deep existential horror to this kind of story, where the person who strikes the bargain is so fundamentally changed by it that they don't even notice that they didn't get what they wanted, which really highlights how much of a grift Faustian bargains can be. It depends on the specific devil. Some of them really do honor their bargains to the letter, and some of them are even kind of nice about it, but some of them are just blatantly self-interested, and they'll renege on any deal they want because they genuinely don't care about fairness or deals or any of the trappings of a bargain. They just care about what they want. This is probably the most classical form a deal with the devil can take, because at its heart, the premise of this trope is that making a deal with the devil is really, really stupid. It's not actually a deal because there's no reciprocity, and the enormous power imbalance puts the mortal participant on the back foot the whole way. If they think they have any real control over the situation, they're grievously misreading it. The house always wins. Ultimately, this trope—
This is what we're trying to fucking get through the head of one of the players at the table I play with. He made a deal pretty early on in our campaign, really. Like, this was within the first 6 months of the campaign. He fucking signs a contract with some sort of being. We still aren't sure if it was a god or just some immortal being or not. So we don't really know. But, yeah. He still is like, he has the contract written out, and he's like, no, and it's just, my dude, come on, your soul, it's not gonna be, god damn it.
Is, in all its forms, a self-inflicted doom, which is why it's either a villain trope or a tragic trope or both, with almost no exceptions. The characters that enthusiastically strike a Faustian bargain are generally self-confident, short-sighted goobers who think they're too smart or too special or too important to be manipulated, and the characters that feel desperate or are forced into it generally spend the entire rest of the story regretting their decision. The first category make for great fun villains because they are tailor-made to suffer a hubristic downfall when they finally realize they aren't the one calling the shots, and the thing that is calling the shots couldn't care less about them. The second category make for walking tragedies with neato superpowers, which is always a fun combination for angst. But there's a sneaky third category that's fallen out of fashion in recent decades, but used to be very big in fairy tales, outsmarting the—
the reason why this one, I think, why this one maybe not as popular lately is because you have to be, as the writer yourself, you have to be extremely fucking smart to pull this off, right? Like, you have to you just have to, like, at least in the way we tell our modern stories, right? You have, like, because they're very different from folk tales and stuff, or how folk tales used to be told. The way we tell our stories nowadays and the way you got to go about it. I mean, heck, even the original, the storytellers saying the folk tales, you got to be really fucking smart to come up with this shit to make it work, right? To make it satisfying. Because again, you have to, right? You have to convince the audience that the deity, the devil here, is fucking smart, right? So that it's a threat. But then you also have to throw in the clues, like, it can't come out of left field. Maybe for some people, if it were to come out of left field, it works. But for me, I need there to be hints that, like, there's a way, small, subtle hints that there's a way perhaps out of it. But then also you got to balance at the same time, like, kind of still getting it across, like, no one's ever outsmarted the devil. And so, like, it's a tough, this one's tough to do. I don't think I am smart enough to do this kind of trope and then do the outsmarting the devil one. I don't think I could do it. Although I am trying to outsmart my DM with certain things. I don't know if it's gonna work. I don't know if my character's even gonna survive till then, but fucking see.
The devil. Instead of being played for angst or hubris, the heroes of these stories stumble into deals with the devil and have to figure out how to make it go away, or how to get its help without paying a terrible price. These stories highlight cunning and cleverness rather than angsting about inevitable damnation or whatever, and the bargaining entity often ends these stories as a bit of a laughingstock. This kind of story does still happen sometimes, where the character making the Faustian bargain either uses their wits or the very powers they got in the bargain to defeat or outsmart the bad guy, but it's not particularly common, possibly because there's a slightly moralized element to this trope. What? Moral absolutism and a trope about deals with the devil? Surely not. Yeah, I know. But it's not a mandatory element of this kind of storytelling. I think the reason it shows up as much as it does, while the stories about characters benefiting from the bargain and then escaping the consequences of falling out of favor, is because, well, to put it bluntly, the devil gets a really bad rap and so does everyone who hangs out with him. Not to dive crazy far into theological history, a field I am very distant from but can already feel boiling my comment section, but back in the day, the Jewish concept
I was literally going to mention, like, it probably delves all the way into theological debate or something. And, well, look at that. It does.
Satan was basically just a prosecuting attorney whose job was to argue with God, who was unconditionally his boss. And speaking as someone with a large Jewish family, I can say from firsthand experience that in this culture, arguing is considered to be extremely healthy and necessary about anything and everything all the time. The Satan we find in the book of
That's one thing I think part of the problem with, I think, maybe perhaps the English language in of itself. That this might have to do with just how the English language has developed and how the way in which we give so many multiple meanings to words, and then we also kind of simplify the words at the same time, right? Arguing sounds negative, just, and perhaps it also has to come with American perhaps, or not American, just childhood trauma in terms of your relationship with arguing, right? Like, if you have a bad relationship with arguing because you only have, when you were a kid and you argued, it only ever devolved into yelling, right? That gives it a negative connotation. And so a normal argument, right? An argument in of itself is not a bad thing. However, just because of a bunch of people's lived experiences, when they think of argument, it kind of, a lot of the time, it's going to, the brain is just going to go straight to yelling. That's an argument. Yelling, bad, flight or fight response, flight. Right? That's how I look at it. And so, yeah, arguing, like, and then of course we come up with the word to, a debate is essentially an argument. But when you say debate versus argument, you're gonna get two very different reactions there.
Job, for instance, is not a deal-making crossroads power broker. God literally asks his opinion and values his perspective. This is not the Satan figure later adapted by Christianity and spread through folklore and pop culture. Pop culture pitchfork Satan is not to be argued with. He's a corrupting and powerful influence to be stalwartly ignored, and anybody who talks to him or listens to him or, God forbid, deals with him can expect, well, I believe the technical term would be eternal damnation, which is also not a concept in Judaism. Fun fact. So the roots of this trope are heavily planted in the concept that dealing with the devil automatically makes you either evil or stupid. So while stories about outsmarting the devil do still happen, there's a reason most of the characters that make Faustian bargains are either unapologetic bad guys or short-sighted and easily manipulable people whose punishment is a tragedy, but, well, they brought it on themselves. Maybe they even deserve it because they should have known better. From this perspective, it's not too surprising that most characters in this context don't get to outsmart the devil, because that would be escaping the consequences for their inherently evil actions, wouldn't it? That would mean they did something bad and weren't punished. I said earlier that this trope, when applied to villains, bakes in their karmic downfall. There's a very popular form of catharsis in seeing bad people suffer, and there's a frustration in seeing bad people escape consequences. But the question of what makes a bad person is absolutely vital to think about when unpacking that. Most modern stories hold that striking deals with devilish characters for wealth or power is automatically a strong black mark in the bad column, but in the old fairy tale days, well, everybody liked the girl that outsmarted Rumpelstiltskin, and there were a lot of stories where the hero took the deal to survive. Fairness is an entirely relative concept, and there's plenty of catharsis to be found in the heroes that escape an unfair situation without having to pay whatever dues that unfair situation levied on them. Is the bargain really a fair deal if the bargainer was desperate and had no other choice? Is it morally imperative for that?
That's a question that I love. I love in stories is the question of how much choice is there really, depending upon the life you've lived, right? Like if you are a poor, starving person in a big city, how much choice do you really have when it comes to bad people offering you a way out, right? Do you really have much choice, right? Is there, like, that's a thing that I fucking love. I love that shit.
That bargainer to then unmake themselves in payment to an opportunistic supernatural loan shark? Are they bad and deserving of punishment because they were desperate and took the first helping hand that reached down? The nature of these stories and their theoretical satisfying ending relies very strongly on the personality of the bargainer. An enthusiastic mass murderer we're probably going to want to see lose. A frightened young girl who just doesn't want to die? I'm probably going to root for her to get out all right, even if she does make a deal with the devil. And even if the devil has a really stupid name. So, yeah.
And that was Trope Talk Faustian Bargains. I hope you guys enjoyed. Remember to hit that like button and subscribe for more. And please do check out the Kickstarter and read my free released chapters. You can I believe you should be able to, I think Google Docs allows you to download them. So that you can just download them as a PDF. I couldn't figure out a way to, I felt this was the most simple way of where a bunch of people use Google. I mean, we're on fucking YouTube, so I was like, all right, we'll use Google Docs. That should also allow people to either print it off for themselves if you want to print it off and read a physical, just like printed paper, or you can just download it as a PDF and read it however. I feel like Google Docs was the best way to go about just getting it out for you guys. Anyways, yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed. Remember to hit that like button, blah, blah, blah. Peace.